what are the dangers? Like, say like the best case scenario is that all these people start growing pot, and the cops say, okay, well, we're going this direction. In 3 years, if the Supreme Court hasn't done it already, in 3 years they go, okay, well, the sky hasn't fallen. But that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that they use this to gather money for their coffers by handing out fines left and right, willy-nilly. They come raid the cafes every day.
Sure.
And that's the worst case scenario.
That's right.
And now there's no real guarantee that when they say decriminalization, that all records are wiped off, and that the U.S. doesn't have access to these records, or that employers don't have access to these records. There's no real guarantee that you've heard anyone state that you agree would work.
No, that's a very good point, David, because in fact it's quite clear what this bill doesn't do, and which we suggest that it should do, is give amnesty to the 600,000 Canadians that already have criminal records for simple possession of cannabis. I mean, if we're now saying, and I think and hope that we are, that people shouldn't have criminal records for cannabis, at least possession, then we got to go back and do some justice to these people that have already been harmed and had their lives ruined by this. You know, with respect to the U.S., I think the cat's out of the bag. You know, once you give the information over, they're going to use it for what they want to use it for. And I don't think, as much as we've been saying to the U.S., it's not your right to come in here and tell us what our domestic policy ought to be. They very legitimately could say to us, it's not your right to tell us what our domestic policy ought to be. Now, the response to that at a kind of a political level from Canada, if they had the political will, would be to say, well, then fine, we're gonna you know, impose some sort of economic embargo or something like that against you until you let these people in, these non-harmful people in. But I mean, that's not going to happen. You know that.
I wouldn't ask them to do that, but I wouldn't mind them saying, well, we're going to experiment with the kind of a Dutch-style model or something similar,
sure.
And then see how it goes, and in the meantime, do what you want at the border.
That's right.
Your prerogative, and we'll get more tourists, and it'll work out better for us.
Well, I mean, if there was a Dutch-style model, David, I think we'd all be pretty happy, and and our setting here in this set might be a little different. Maybe we'd be filming up in the coffee shop and ordering from the menu.
The menu would be on the table, but the menu is not on the table, folks.
If you can keep it in for a few years, you'll see it was landmark legislation.
I do favor the decriminalization of marijuana.
Can our government be competent? Jimmy Carter says yes. Jimmy Carter says yes.
Tonight on Headline News, President Carter proposes major changes to federal drug laws.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana, leaving the states free to adopt whatever laws they wish concerning marijuana.
And that's why now is the time. I guess it's at the first reading stage, right?
It's beyond that, actually. It's passed through committee. First reading is pre-committee. It's now passed through committee. It's been given. Patty Tornsey, the chair of the committee, gave it to the House apparently this morning. And so there's about a 72-hour window before they can start actually voting on it now, with the crazy stuff going on with Chrétien and getting out. This thing may never even get voted on.
Right.
So that's a real problem.
Well, now, and it has to go to the Senate before it becomes law?
After it's voted on, if it's passed, it goes to the Senate. They're the sober, second look, and they have to.
Today, a Senate committee has recommended Canada legalize it, because it says science proves marijuana is no more harmful than alcohol.
We're very serious. It's not a joke.
Even possessing pot has been a criminal offense in Canada for decades. And though millions of Canadians have smoked it, hundreds of thousands now have criminal records to prove it, something the Senate committee wants to change. It says studies show marijuana is less harmful than alcohol, that it does not lead to harder drugs, and that the laws don't stop people from smoking it anyway. So, it recommends regulating the sale of pot. Trafficking would stay illegal, shutting out criminals. Instead, licensed retailers. Anyone over 16 could buy it. As for those with criminal records for possession now, amnesty for everyone. Their report has no legal teeth, But it comes just as a Commons committee is studying the same thing. Its report is due in November. The cabinet minister, who will have a big say in the final decision, has already said decriminalizing might be better than legalizing, but
certainly the government is open-minded in doing something on that side. Are we ready to go as far? We'll see.
Already pushing the government to go that far, this drug policy researcher.
We need to treat cannabis as a health issue and a social issue, not as a criminal justice issue.
Prove it before it becomes.
And this all has to happen in 72 hours.
No. That happens. No, the 72 hours. Sorry, I probably wasn't very clear. Okay. The 72 hours is after you present the bill to the House. Mm-hmm. There's a period of time before which they can't vote on it, and that's the 72 hours.
Okay.
So once that's elapsed, they vote.
Yeah.
Perhaps they pass it.
Yeah.
Then it goes to the Senate. Then it comes into force.
Okay, so the quickest they could make this law is if everyone was on fast track. If the Senates were on board, if everyone was so geared up for this thing.
And if the House wasn't maybe proroguing on Friday.
Yeah.
They're certainly going on a one-week holiday at minimum.
Well, if that wasn't happening, pretend that wasn't happening as well, how quickly could this be done?
It could potentially be law Monday or Tuesday.
Right.
And then there'd be a coming into force date, which is, they like to bump it out a bit, and maybe January 1st.
Okay,
would be a realistic assessment.
So really the last opportunity to affect how your representatives vote on this is right now.
Do it now.
Okay, and
should have been doing it all along, by the way, but if you haven't, do it now. Vote the way you feel.
You vote the way you feel.
30 grams of marijuana, that's about an ounce, would not be treated as a criminal offense. Instead, a fine would be paid. However, trafficking any amount would remain a crime. The report also recommends education programs targeted at young people. While visiting Buffalo today, U.S. drug czar John Walters repeated his claim that lenient drug laws would become a major border headache for both countries.
A time of crisis from threat of terror, at a time of long friendship, is that supply will become a source of greater friction at the border, which we don't want.
We contend that the penalty, a permanent criminal record, represents a case where the punishment exceeds the crime, particularly when 3 in 10 Canadians admit to engaging under current laws in criminal activity. The committee believes, however, that legalizing marijuana distribution, sale, and possession is not in the best interests of the country. Particularly true is the fact that normalizing marijuana use sends a poor message to our youth, who may perceive that the government is not concerned about their use of marijuana. We are, and we should be. Moreover, legal opinion exists that marijuana legalization would violate our agreements that we have.
If Canada moves forward with decriminalization, a blueprint for the process can be lifted from the Netherlands. Known around the world for its liberal drug enforcement policies, cannabis cafes are as common as the local coffee shop. CTV's Tom Kennedy takes a look at what 30 years of going soft on so-called soft drugs has meant in Amsterdam.
A small group of young men on a day off, lighting up in one of Amsterdam's 284 cannabis cafes. It is all perfectly legal, yet not far away a cannabis grower won't show his face because this is illegal. It is the Dutch compromise. Arrest the suppliers, leave users alone.
It may seem an odd way to enforce drug laws, but the Dutch police say they can live with it, and generally the people of this country say their approach to drugs works.
A doctor at a substance abuse clinic.
Well, if you ask parents, would you like to get rid of the cannabis policy, I think there's a majority of the parents that would say that's unwise. Let's keep it like this.
One of the arguments against decriminalizing cannabis has been that soft drug use leads young people to such things as cocaine and heroin, but the Dutch experience indicates otherwise. 20 years ago, 9.9% of hard drug addicts were young people. Today, that figure has dropped to just 1.2%. And overall, the Netherlands has the lowest percentage of hard drug users of any major European country. And the argument that decriminalization encourages drug use among the young, again, the Dutch experience. 28% of young people here report that they have tried cannabis at least once. Yet in the United States, where there is a war on drugs, that figure is 41%.
In the United States, you have only one message, and that is just say no the first time. Now, I don't know how realistic that is.
But at the Dutch Parliament, some conservative politicians say drugs contribute to crime. Canada should be careful.
if they look at the Dutch situation, don't just follow one of these researchers, because the situation is not as positive as it seems.
But the corner cafes that sell cannabis are now part of the fabric of neighborhood life. Not everybody likes it. Cannabis is a habit of the minority, but it is difficult to find anybody who thinks the country should undo a decision it took 30 years ago. Tom Kennedy, CTV News, Amsterdam.